everyone, and welcome to the webinar for Churchill Borough's Planning and Visioning Project for its C1 Commercial District. The topic today is living infrastructure and resource conservation. My name is Elaine Kramer, and I'm a community planner with Pashik MTR, a local consulting firm. This introduction is a recreation because part of the video failed to record on May 6th. We will pick up with the live recorded webinar after this introduction. I'm here with Jim Pashik, our firm's founding partner, and my colleague, Keely McDonald, as well as Tess DeYoung from Connect, the Congress of Neighboring Communities. I'm thrilled to welcome you, our webinar audience. We hope you're doing well these days and staying safe. We're so glad you're joining the webinar and appreciate your time and interest in this important planning and visioning project. In just a minute, we'll introduce the panelists participating in the webinar. First, I want to give you a brief introduction to the project. We're here tonight because Churchill Borough decided to undertake a community planning and visioning project regarding the future of its commercial C1 district. So here you can see the borough's zoning map with the C1 district shown here in light blue. You see the surrounding area has R's on it. R stands for residential and C stands for commercial. The visioning project is asking you, the residents, what you would like to see happen in this district. It's a big part of the community. I'd like to begin by talking a little bit about how this is an outgrowth of Churchill's 10-year comprehensive plan. So back in 2016 and 2017, Churchill joined with Wilkins and Monroeville to develop a joint comprehensive plan. And this was adopted in 2018. One recommendation was for Churchill to proactively plan for what could happen in this large part of the community. And that comprehensive plan begat this visioning project. Here's how tonight's webinar fits into the larger project. There's a 6-part webinar series, including this one, where you can listen to panel discussion and ask questions of people with expertise in different topic areas. There were 2 last week and 2 tonight and 2 on Wednesday, May 13th. The panel discussions and webinars are designed to help all residents share their thoughts and learn more about the possibilities of new development in the C1 district. They can become engaged in the visioning process and project itself and ask questions. Besides this, many of you know about a community questionnaire that's available both online and on paper. You can go to churchillborough.com to learn more about that. About this webinar, here are some logistics. It is being recorded for later viewing. All 6 webinar recordings will be posted on the Borough website, churchillborough.com. The agenda shows how we'll divide up our time tonight during the webinar. And during the webinar, participants may submit a question using the Zoom toolbar and the Q&A function. A bit of an introduction. Let me show you 2 more maps to help you get the lay of the land. Then we're going to introduce our panelists. What you can see here is a community context map that shows Churchill and its surrounding areas. So what you see here are, the surrounding neighborhoods. You have Penn Hills up here and Wilkinsburg, Forest Hills on this side, and Wilkins over here to the southeast. Within Churchill Borough, this is the Parkway East, goes like this. You can see the Edgewood Country Club here, the high school, junior high over here. And the area outlined in purple are the 2 parcels that make up the C1 district that this planning and visioning project is all about. Now, the yellow lines you see are roads and streets, and the little white rectangles are building footprints. So you can see along these streets, the small residential building footprints are homes, and then the larger white rectangles, such as up here along Rodi Road, are commercial buildings, and that is true also in the C1 district. You can see the larger buildings that make up that former Westinghouse R&D site. This map is an aerial blow-up of the C1 district specifically, and you can see that the 2 parcels together make up just shy of 150 acres. This larger parcel is 133, and the smaller one is 13. You can see that the C1 district is bounded by the Parkway, Beulah Road, Greensburg Pike, and Lewin Lane. My fun fact is that back in the 1950s, when Westinghouse first developed this site, they made it look like a locomotive engine because Westinghouse was a leading manufacturer of locomotive air brakes. And the corporation wanted this site to be visible and recognizable when executives were flying into Pittsburgh. This was long before Google aerial views. So it is my pleasure now to introduce our panelists. Let me get right to that. It is truly an astonishing group of people. They all have skill and knowledge and expertise about natural resources and conservation of living infrastructure. They come at these specialties in different ways. You can learn more about them by reading about them via a PDF at churchillborough.com. We're so honored and grateful that they volunteered to participate, and I'm just thrilled to be able to introduce them to you all. Lisa Hollingsworth Zegedy is a resident of Edgewood Borough and a seasoned environmental planner. She's currently director for River Restoration for American Rivers, a national nonprofit focusing on saving wild rivers, restoring damaged rivers, and conserving clean water for people and nature. She works throughout Pennsylvania as well as West Virginia and Georgia. Lisa is a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners and had spent her career in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors focused on natural resources planning, environmental management, and environmental restoration. Zaheen Hussain, a native of Bangladesh and a Pittsburgh transplant by way of Connecticut, my home state, serves as Director of Sustainability at New Sun Rising. Working with the Millvale Eco District Collaborative as Millvale's Sustainability Coordinator, Zaheen helps advance Millvale's Eco District goals in the areas of food, water, energy, mobility, air quality, and equity. He previously worked as project manager at Grounded Strategies. Focusing primarily on energy efficiency, he helped lead the Re-Energize Pittsburgh Coalition, where he worked collaboratively to increase demand for energy efficiency services through bridging organizational partnerships and increasing community-level advocacy. He earned a bachelor's in environmental science from University of Connecticut. Michael Noob is Director of Special Projects at the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, where his work crosses over several of the Conservancy's program areas. He manages a portfolio of land conservation projects across Pennsylvania, advises the Conservancy's Community Gardens and Green Space program, both for community engagement and planning, and manages the Conservancy's strategic planning efforts. Michael earned a bachelor's in political science from College of Worcester and completed graduate coursework in urban and regional affairs at the University of Pittsburgh. Heather Manzo is the executive director of the Allegheny County Conservation District. The Conservation District is the regulatory entity responsible for protecting water and soil through its DEP delegated and state contract programs. She previously worked at Penn State as a regional food systems and community economic development expert specializing in the business, marketing, and policy needs related to the intersection of agriculture, natural resource, and land use. Her experience includes leading and implementing organizational level sustainability plans, lead project management, and international research projects in horticulture and agriculture. She holds an MS in Sustainable Systems and a BS in Business and Marketing. Paul Wielden is a member of Turtle Creek Watershed Alliance and currently is zoning officer and community planner for Monroeville, where he's worked and where he has lived since 2003. Paul grew up in Penn Hills, and his father worked at the Churchill Westinghouse location in the 1980s. I love this story. Paul remembers collecting fishing worms in the fields on the property. After graduating from Penn Hills High School, he enlisted in the Army and served during Operation Desert Storm and also was stationed in Berlin. Upon discharge, Paul earned a Bachelor of Landscape Architecture from Penn State and then worked for the design firm Farringer McCarty Gray for nearly 20 years. In that position, he worked on development projects, including large single-family residential developments, shopping centers, and business parks. We're so pleased to have the opportunity to hear from these experts and thank them again for their participation. The first question for Michael Knoop and Zaheen Hussain is this. This webinar topic is living infrastructure and resource conservation. You both work on resource conservation in communities in the Pittsburgh area. What does living infrastructure mean to you? Here we pick up with their answers.
And store it there for long enough that, it can be released slowly. Otherwise, the other option is digging up all those pipes and putting in bigger pipes, which you can imagine the cost difference between that and just trying to store it up there on the property.
Yeah, and all of this really illustrates the importance of connecting the intention of community planners around what do existing residents need in terms of ecosystem services and look and feel and livability. What do the municipalities need in terms of ordinance development and support? What is the regulatory role? And then also, what is the aptitude for private development industry, appetite for private development to take all of these things into consideration? So I think the previous set of comments really underscores the importance that the leg bone is connected to the hip bone and how progressive can development be to be tied to those public interests. And it really takes some novel approaches to public-private engagement and partnership.
Heather, thank you for that. I'd just like to, this is Jim Pashik, I'd just like to break into this wonderful discussion for a couple things. I noticed we haven't gotten any questions from our attendees, and I want to encourage those of you in the attendees to use that Q&A box and ask our panelists questions because we're going to have time about 6:25 or so to post some of those questions to the panelists. So please use the Q&A and we'll queue those up for the panelists 6:25. I'd also like to mention that the owner of the property has requested an opportunity to speak, and at 6:25 we'll invite that person to make a statement as well. So I just wanted to give that in, but attendees, please send in your questions for the panelists. They're top notch and they'll share their thoughts with you. Thank you.
And I just want to add that I goofed. I thought I had pressed record at the beginning, but I didn't. So I just started it. I'm really sorry. My bad. So those were really good, and I'm glad we could capture them. And I hope we can get back to all of them later. We are having this conversation in the context of potential future redevelopment of this commercial district. So, as we think about things like the steps of development. You know, you have grading and infrastructure. That is how a site is changed in preparation for what will go in. And then the construction part, what is actually added to the site in terms of buildings and features. So I was hoping we could start with the first of those, the grading and infrastructure improvements. So, you know, when you think about sewer, water, power, energy, transportation access, along with preparing the site for whatever building is to come. So this site, if you can picture it at all, it's called Pittsburgh Flat. It has hills around it, but you know, it can be, there is obviously development there, and you know, there could be additional land that could be regraded. So, you know, this natural terrain was disturbed a long time ago when Westinghouse developed it in the 50s and 60s. So, you know, when large sites are developed, there's always disturbance to the landscape. So I wanted to ask Paul, since you're on the Turtle Creek Watershed Board, what are some effects that grading and infrastructure have on some of the natural systems or natural resources that we were just listing and talking about, the streams, the watershed, the tree cover? And then what are the measures that developers take to mitigate the harm? And then I'm going to ask the same question or similar ones to some others on this panel.
Okay, well, we've already talked about some of the stuff. You know, when you cut down trees, you lose some of the shade over the water temperatures rise. Water temperature increase is bad for a lot of invertebrates and fish. You know, trout like cold water, not warm water. Obviously, when you clear a site to build, there's a lot of potential for erosion. So luckily, over the last 20 years, developers have been forced, because they wouldn't do it on their own, to put up silt fence and sediment basins to capture that erosion before it gets into the stream and does irreparable damage. Once the development's done, you know, you have large parking lots or roads. In the wintertime, we see a lot of salt added to those roads for safety and ice and snow melt, and that salt eventually ends up in the streams and in the environment where you know, it didn't naturally come from. It came from some other place. So there's a lot of pollutants, increases in temperature, also from those parking lots. Fortunately, cars have gotten a lot better, but you know, 20 years ago, almost all the cars leaked oil or gas or some kind of petrochemicals, and all of that would get flushed down into the streams, creeks. So you know, things have gotten better, but they're still out there. Air pollution, you know, during construction, a lot of heavy equipment, diesel, there's a lot of pollution involved during the construction process. Hopefully, once the development's done, it depends on the designer, the developer, the owner, the zoning ordinance, other requirements, but hopefully there's a lot of landscaping that's put back in, you know, to help replace what was removed. So, you know, there's good and bad with development. You know, we need development to keep moving forward. You know, as you know, I worked with developers for 20 years, so I always like to see progress, new things being built, but I also like to recycle what's there. You know, there's a lot of empty spaces I'd like to see reused. So you don't always need to start from scratch. You can, you know, reuse something that's available. So, you know, there's lots of things that go into development. It's, you know, there's a lot of people that are anti-development. They don't want to ever see a tree cut. They don't want to see anything damaged. But, you know, when you ask those people, where do you live? And they tell you whatever subdivision or whatever. And you say, okay, well, you know, how many trees were cut to create where you live? And, you know, so most people live in a house or a subdivision. You know, there was some kind of ecological damage created to create where you live. You know, it's not really fair to deny that opportunity to other people. So there's good and bad with it, pros and cons. I try to be somewhere in the middle with it.
Thank you. Really good points. Lisa and Heather, same question for you, but I wondered if you could also start to talk about what steps do the jurisdictional bodies take, whether borough, county, state, EPA, to protect natural systems during the site planning, site preparation, and infrastructure phase.
So Heather, you want to talk about the conservation district and how that works, and then I can go to the higher level?
Sounds perfect. Thanks, Lisa.
Mhm.
So conservation districts were born out of the Dust Bowl. So I promise I'm not going to give you, 70 years of history, but it's important to note that conservation districts are very closely associated with our natural resource soil. So NRCS, federal agency, very closely connected to DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection. And so the role of conservation districts is to be that enforcement mitigation body in between development, preserving ecosystem services during development, and making sure that there's a regulatory check to make sure that techniques are used and best management practices are used during the phase of construction and development and operations and maintenance to keep soil in place, protect the quality of waterways. And so we have a very, very specific role in that space. So we're part of the National Erosion and Sediment Control Program, otherwise known as Chapter 102. So that is the program that you'd see inspectors out making sure that there's things like silt socks that were mentioned before. But we all know that the role of regulatory is kind of limited and imperfect, and that, resources are always an issue, both at the federal level and at the state level. So conservation districts have a variety of forms. Some are part of county government, some are totally independent. So here in Allegheny County, despite what our name might say, we are 100% independent of both the county and state governments, except for running those two Chapter 102 and 105 programs to protect those pieces. So we're really a partner who is working with the developers up front before a development project is started to make sure that those BMPs are in place through the course of development to make sure they're being followed, and then through a 5-year life cycle at the maximum end to make sure that the operations and maintenance phase is taken care of. But that's, this little regulatory box. And so really what we're trying to do in Allegheny County and in several other counties around the state, especially those related to urban issues where redevelopment is really the name of the game rather than development, is that we're really looking at built environment impacting negatively things at a watershed level, at a multi-municipality level. And so that's another sphere that really connects a lot of different political entities. And so it gets really tricky. In Allegheny County, we have the Home Rule Charter. It gives a lot of independence to each municipality, which then takes the shape of how municipal ordinances are shaped and how they're enacted. So we have this little piece, municipalities have a little piece, and then there's some big federal pieces through the EPA. But again, this is where I really think working in a way that ACCD is moving towards, which is regulatory plus. So taking some progressive engineering techniques, green infrastructure, credits for preserving tracts of trees that are in place rather than cutting them down and putting in detention ponds. We're really interested in working to take that concept of regulatory plus to the development community, as well as also to partners, in community development, so citizens themselves and the municipalities that are making the decisions that as a whole have the responsibility for how things end up looking and feeling day to day.
So I'll follow up on that with the Chapter 102 and Chapter 105 that Heather mentioned. That's actually the state's obligation under the Clean Water Act. And so the Clean Water Act says that we protect all the waters in the United States because there's a purpose for that, we all need clean water. So we need to avoid sediments being discharged to waters. We need to avoid, destroying wetlands. And there's the floodplain, National Floodplain program that says, you can't build in the floodplain in a way that causes water to rise on somebody else. So there's a lot of protections that are built in place to make sure that development doesn't cause harm to people nearby. And a lot of that becomes encapsulated in the municipalities' permitting for those developments. And then in some cases, that permitting may fall over to the conservation district where when the land disturbance actually starts happening, then the conservation district will look at that from the, are you releasing sediment to the streams? Do you have your silt socks in place? And that sort of thing. If you've got to, if there's wetlands on sites that are going to be impacted by the project, then the Army Corps of Engineers will get involved, and there's another level of regulations that have to come into account there. Another thing that nobody has discussed, my guess is the Westinghouse site would fall under the brownfield, the Act 2 brownfields. And that's another set of regulations that specifies that, sites that meet certain conditions can be developed for certain types of reuse. And the fact that we've got this really incredible site, very developable site, and we will be reusing that, the Churchill Borough will be reusing that as a new commercial district, I think is a phenomenal opportunity. The infrastructure is there in terms of access and water and sewer and those sorts of things, and that just facilitates the development. But I think that within Churchill Borough, as they look at redeveloping that property, there's development standards that are already in place, and the planning department, the development organization for the community can say, how can we redevelop this and meet these standards that are put in place to make sure that we get a development that's a good quality and that it's what the community is looking for. So a certain amount of those regulations lie right there within the borough's ability to decide what those standards are and to implement them themselves.
Thank you. Yeah, that's, part of the point of the visioning process is to, understand what it is that the community would like to see happen and what are the community's priorities. So thank you. I wondered if Michael and Heather could begin the answer to this one. When we think about the later stages of redevelopment, after the site is graded and the infrastructure is put in place and, developer is starting to construct the buildings, I'd like to ask some of the same questions about the buildings and the features that could be constructed and operated on a commercially zoned site. What are some ways that new buildings and features of a site affect natural systems? And how might the buildings and operations of a site, what could some mitigations be? So Michael and Heather?
Well, I think, again, going back to stormwater for this site, I think one thing that worries me about redevelopment here is expansion of impervious surfaces anymore than what's necessary. And then especially parking lots and rooftops is what I'm talking about. Rooftops, there's some interesting strategies there. It's not really something the Conservancy does directly, but green roofs are always an interesting thing to discuss, and I'll just stop with that idea there because that's about all I can contribute. But with the parking lots, there are definitely some creative things that can be done to continue to allow as much parking as you need, but also use parking lots and what's underneath of them and what you plant within them and around them to capture stormwater. And then again, going back to those multiple benefits, provide shading in those parking lots also, and canopy cover that, in addition to the shading, helps to absorb and produce oxygen, absorb carbon dioxide, and then continue to absorb stormwater. And also, probably make a more attractive looking site than a big piece of blacktop without trees in it. So I think that's probably the first thing that comes to my mind here. But then also there's so much land on this site in a relatively densely populated area that there's quite a bit of there's some amount of intact forest there. There's some open land where there's a lot of potential for I would say restoration and to the extent that it isn't developed, reusing it as green space and open space for people to use for recreation and for continued development of green infrastructure and using the landscape to absorb stormwater and provide ecosystem service benefit.
So doing development and preserving other areas and making those places amenable for people to use in the community.
Absolutely, yeah.
So Heather, can you jump in on that too?
That was so well said. I think that there are precepts that make so much sense for that site. And we know too that there's synergistic effects with not just for housing prices, but for other businesses that are co-located with recreational tourism opportunities. And you can put together business clusters in ways that can, draw in customers or clients. It can even help with the planning and the recruitment of what types of businesses to recruit into a development. And really, that is something that can be so informed by people like you who are watching us talk right now. And we would love to hear from you. But really, what services and what recreational and outdoor opportunities, what does the community envision? And so can that be worked into a plan? If we look at, building engineering and architecture design itself, of which I am not an expert, there are, a number of things that can happen with that could be pulled from, say, the LEED certification world, from living building challenges, from ways that could connect even transportation hubs in novel ways, and redevelopment schemes, for example, potentially putting up solar arrays and charging stations for electric vehicles. So again, I think that's where using a systems approach to planning so that we can, as much as possible, preserve ecosystem services, benefits to existing residents, and have a development that has a sustainable fiscal future. Because I'm sure we can all name examples from the region where there's been big push, you check the boxes, do the environmental studies, have the thing be built. And then if the tenants aren't seeing the business that they need to stay in business, then the whole thing can collapse. And so certainly, in my opinion, we don't need more sort of strip malls that are empty at some half a generation or full generation into the future. So I think really planning with that forward-looking eye to integrating a new redevelopment project into the existing and future needs of the community with the ecosystem services and fiscal sustainability there are just key to having a win-win for everybody involved.
Thank you. Look far down the road if we can. Yeah.
Was something to that?
Yeah.
One of the things that, everything that's been said is absolutely spot on for that site. It's important to recognize when you develop with ecosystem services in mind, rather than having pieces of the infrastructure to support that development serving one purpose each, you get these multiple benefits. And one of the things that Michael mentioned was parking lots. And I've seen a really exciting movement towards having a parking lot that, you park cars on it during certain times of, business hours, but that it's developed in such a way that it can also can double as green space. It can be spaces for, outdoor gatherings. And especially right now, if we're going to have outdoor gatherings, we're going to need a lot more space than we've had in the past. Especially at this time, I think there's some flexibility in looking at this site creatively and trying to decide how can we develop this, not just on the way we used to do business, but on how the next generation of business could happen. What is the next generation of outdoor recreation like? What is how are we going to gather in these public spaces? And how can we make a parking lot become more than just a place to put cars for 8 hours a day?
Unmute myself there. Thank you. Yeah, that was really interesting, forward thinking to look into what the next generation will want. Zaheen, in your position as sustainability coordinator for Millvale and your work with New Sun Rising, one thing you try to promote is a way of thinking that considers all aspects of living infrastructure and resource conservation from the beginning. you know, like now, before anything happens, when everything is just in the visioning phase. And so building on what other people have touched on, could you talk a little bit more about that? And what would you hope a developer, a community, all the jurisdictional bodies would be thinking about now during visioning before development gets underway?
Sure. Yeah, you know, right off the bat, first and foremost, are conversations just like this, where community members and stakeholders are able to gather, learn from experts about the assets that they have in their community, both living as well as gray. You may all be familiar with it, but you know, it's not complicated. It's called asset mapping. Which is a very important exercise. It's important to practice it in different venues. You know, for us, we had the good fortune back in the day of being able to gather in person, which obviously can't happen now, but even that has its limitations. You know, for example, this probably would have been kind of a traditional community meeting. Not everyone can attend those because they might be at work, they might have other obligations. So finding different channels of being able to communicate with your community, but also being able to bring this level of education and information to as many people as possible so they can conceptualize what's being created, and be able to voice their hopes, needs, and dreams as needed. In terms of what we want stakeholders to think through, you know, part of that starts with what your motivating factor is. If you're a hardcore environmentalist that has an aching heart for polar bears, you might just have a very, very environmental agenda. There's nothing wrong with that. I come from somewhat of an environmentalist background. If you're a developer, you're looking at your return on investment over a long period of time. I often try to take that perspective because we're all, in a way, in a community investing something, whether it's dollars, whether it's our time, or our kind of role in other ways of being a community member. Really thinking about, well, let's say at the top of a hill, you want to build a traditional parking lot because there's a parking need for your community. What you might want to consider is, well, what's at the bottom of the hill? If it's a bunch of businesses and homes, and building a parking lot at the top of the hill might destabilize the land that's around it. Well, in a more rain-intensive environment, that might cause a landslide that then can eliminate those homes or those businesses from being able to exist and contribute to your tax base. So doing that calculation, thinking about different perspectives, bringing that perspective up front, and then doing, again, that return on investment calculation of, well, this might make sense now, but what are the costs now? What are the benefits? What might those costs and benefits look like in the future in somewhat of a changing environment?
Again, that future orientation and the cradle to cradle cost estimating.
And if I missed anything, please, folks, contribute.
Well, yeah, does anybody else want to jump in on that? And then pretty soon we're going to go to the participant Q&A. Well, then let me ask Lisa another thing. Your organization works all over the country in advocacy to protect natural systems. So could you give us some context from elsewhere? I think it's always valuable to learn from other places. So when a large site comes up for redevelopment, the owner and developer naturally anticipate maximizing profitability. Meanwhile, this discussion is about protecting natural resources through land use and environmental regulations and choices that owners and developers can make in the beginning of their planning process. So honestly and realistically, are land use and environmental regulations incompatible with profitability?
Not at all. You know, for the longest time, I really tried to carry the message early on in my career that that these two things are not mutually exclusive. You can have development and protection of natural resources. It's building that site and coming up with a design that takes the context of the site into account. And you know, where a lot of people may say, oh well, there's a little stream going through here and it's going down, we've got to put that stream in a culvert and we've got to put something on top of it because we have to make every square inch of this rentable space or leasable space. And what we found over time is that, you know, maybe the community doesn't really need 2 million square feet of commercial development. Maybe the community would benefit by a little bit less square footage of leasable space that's designed with the context of the site that creates those amenities. And instead of looking out the window of the commercial development and seeing pavement and parking lot, instead you see trees and you see, a community asset rather than just a place where you go spend your money. And it creates a real sense of place and improves the livability as well as reducing things like stormwater runoff and that sort of thing. There have been studies all over the country. We now have economic methods for monetizing the benefits of retaining those natural resources or creating the biomimicry that creates those green spaces and provides those benefits. There's a dollar amount that's worth, and so we can calculate that. So the value of a footpath next to a stream between, that's been retained on a site that provides some green infrastructure benefits, that has a dollar benefit, and it's, that can factor into that. Additionally, we found looking at the costs or the cost and the benefits of restoring rivers and providing access for recreation, for scenic views and that kind of thing. If development backs up to green space, that usually the purchaser will pay about a 30% premium on that. The value of having a free-flowing stream is somewhere between 15 and 25% additional compared to other types of development. A green parking lot, because it reduces the cost of having to manage that runoff, can have a calculable benefit that is returned to the developer. So it's not just about how many square feet you create and what the market rate is. It's creating a quality development that gives something back to the community, provides those benefits, minimizes the demand on the overall community infrastructure, and then creates a place that has a context that people can say, oh yeah, I'm from Churchill. Oh, it's that place that's got that beautiful new downtown, new downtown area. It's something that people can be proud of rather than just, another strip mall with another parking lot and another hill slope that fails every time it rains.
Thank you, Lisa. We're at our point, we're actually 2 minutes past, where we're going to switch now to questions from the attendees. But before we did that, we promised that the owner's representative would have a chance to share their thoughts. And so, Tess, if you could unmute, is it Ms. O'Neill? Is she the one that's with us?
Yes, good evening. My name is Rachel O'Neill. I am with Reed Smith LLP and we represent the property owner. I'm here to reiterate our objection to this process for failure to properly integrate the property owner into the process. And we previously read a statement and sent a letter today, and those are part of the record. If we have anything additional, we will let you know. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And we will definitely be including the documents you send in the record for this. So now I'm turning to Keely to find out if you have some questions. Otherwise, we'll go back to some of the questions we have for the panelists.
Yes, we do. We do have some questions for the panelists. One of the first ones that I received was, and this is kind of for everyone on the panel, what are some kind of success stories or successful examples in the Pittsburgh region of utilizing these kind of conservation efforts and green infrastructure that these residents could kind of look towards to further understand what these things are?
I would point selfishly to a very local example here. If you're ever in Millvale and you find yourself on Hawthorne Road, there's an incredible bioswale, which is, you can Google bioswale and see what they are, but they're natural landscapes that help mitigate stormwater and are built by humans to mimic natural landscapes. It probably covers, it's probably like 20 feet wide and maybe 200 feet long, but it prevents stormwater from entering into Gertie's Run from 11 acres of surrounding land, which is a lot of water from a lot of land over the course of the full year. That's stormwater that isn't creating combined sewage overflows, that stormwater that's not contributing to flooding events that may happen, that stormwater that's not ending up into our rivers where we get our drinking water, which we then pay to clean to be able to drink. It ran in maybe the $100,000 range as a project. You can look it up online, but yeah, you can come visit it. It's very impressive to see in person. Mainly because it's not that impressive. It just looks like the rest of the land, but it does this really incredible job.
I have two brief examples, one of which is downtown Pittsburgh. It's the Allegheny County office building, which has a green roof that is 15-ish more years old. It's been there for quite some time. The reason that roof is significant is because green infrastructure is a tricky topic and can be controversial, because whenever straight line development is happening, there's timelines, there's budgets, there's a lot of hard realities that make it difficult in many cases to put these sort of big sustainability initiatives into projects. And so part of the issue with green infrastructure is how much is what's been engineered and designed above ground is really impacting anything successfully below ground, such as slowing down stormwater infiltration, or making the lag time between water hitting the surface of the earth or pavement and it rushing through the overtaxed combined sewage overflow systems and into the river, for example. So this county project was important because data was collected. It was one of the first green roofs in our ecosystem that really tracked at a deep level what those services, what was happening within that building. So that's kind of nice to know that we have this formative data set that's a local example. Second one, brief 4-mile run project in the Greenfield neighborhood, kind of between the new Almano and the bottom ballpark of Shenley Park. Floods, has all sorts of problems, but there's a really neat project that a lot of people don't know about that Penn State partnered with City of Pittsburgh and a bunch of other partners on to do a multiple block section that has sidewalks that look and feel normal, but they actually allow rainfall infiltration. There's deeper curb cuts and planting boxes to allow for rain gardens and better infiltration and intake of more water during rain events. So just in case you want to get out and about, there's all sorts of things. I think if you start to sort of know what to look for, you'll notice Pittsburgh does have quite a bit of green infrastructure in place.
Another example locally is 9 Mile Run and the effort to reduce stormwater through planting trees and also doing rain barrel collections. And it's, a lot of people will say, well, yeah, that's a small percentage, but a small percentage can really add up. And when you're looking at continuing to retrofit existing facilities and then build new with those benefits in place, it just provides continued benefits. The Green Building Alliance in Pittsburgh is also a phenomenal resource, and my guess is they've got a portfolio of projects in the Pittsburgh area and in nearby that you can take a look at. I've been around the state and walked on green bioswales along the roads in downtown State College. Ohio Pile and Ohio Pile State Park have a really awesome green infrastructure partnership where they have put in permeable parking areas. They've put in rain gardens, bioswales. They have a living machine to service the wastewater in their new park headquarters and visitor center that's right along the river. So it's been done successfully in a lot of places, and there are economic evaluations that actually capture the value of those benefits that those facilities provide.
There's also actually an example of a permeable parking lot at where the Penn State Extension offices are at the Energy Innovation Center. Again, open to the public and good demonstration. On a rainy day, it's really cool to watch where the water kind of runs off in the regular pavement, but is absorbed into the ground where the pavement is permeable.
I was going to put in a plug for our parking lot down at Falling Water too, which of course, those of you from Patrick MTR who are with MTR are very familiar with, having designed it. It's a green parking lot that has a lot of native plantings and so forth in it that really looks nice and functions ecologically really well.
Go ahead, Keely.
Okay, so another question is, and I don't know if anyone has an answer for this, is there any seepage from old coal mines on the site?
I have not been made aware of that, but you know, they are everywhere. I haven't heard of that here.
The Department of Environmental Protection has a department specifically related to abandoned mines. Mm-hmm. So I'm not familiar enough with their database or, you know, a site analysis or assessment. But that is a resource for people who are interested in abandoned mines.
You can go to the, there's a site for people that want to look at, like, to buy hazard insurance in case there's a coal mine under your home. So you can see where all the old coal mines are. And then also in the surface water section of DEP, they have a list of all the known mine discharges. And so it would just be a little bit of research that would need to take place. But I think that's a really good question, and I appreciate the person submitting that. I certainly think that it's a piece of information that needs to be considered as this plan goes forward.
And then another question, which we've kind of touched on the subject. Someone asked if there are porous materials that could be utilized on the site to reduce runoff on paved surfaces. We've talked about porous pavement, but if you could enlighten us on any other solutions that you know of using green infrastructure to help reduce runoff on paved surfaces.
There's a really great example in the borough of Etna. They actually utilize this along their sidewalks, this kind of trough that they covered with a metal grate that has some art on it. I mean, the metal is cut into flowers, etc. You can make it artistic, you don't have to. But this trough weaves through the sidewalk, and then it ends up leading into a rain garden, which captures all that stormwater. It's really interesting because the buildings that are on that street, their downspouts connect into that trough. So the stormwater that's falling on the roof of those buildings, they end up in the gutter and then into this trough, and it's channeled into the rain garden. What's really cool about it is the trough has a wavy shape as it kind of goes down through the sidewalk, which makes it like a stream in a way, kind of. But the reason they did that actually was to avoid utility lines and pipes that were along those buildings under the ground there. So by making the trough wavy, not only did they make it more artistic and pretty to look at, but it actually served this very utilitarian purpose of avoiding utility lines.
In addition to that, I'm sorry. In addition to that, the site is very large, and there's a lot of green space already there. So there's plenty of room, for man-made ways to control stormwater besides just putting it underground in a tank or in, some crummy-looking above-ground pond. There's also a lot of trees on site. You can make some really nice buffer areas. So there's a lot of potential for this site. Just because it is so large and a lot of it is not yet developed.
Great. Thank you, Elaine. I wonder if we could post your poll, see what the attendees think of this.
Sure, that's a good idea. So, participants, can you see that okay? Let me launch this. Okay.
There we go.
So, we would like to ask you which step for conserving natural resources should be the borough's highest priority via regulation or incentives. And we list trees, tree-related, stormwater management, runoff preventions, energy sourcing, buildings with low or net zero consumption of energy, amenities that encourage non-motorized transportation, or none.
I kind of think the first two could be combined into one, and I kind of like those two as high priority.
Yeah, that's a good point, Paul. Let's see what the attendees have to say. Let's see, we have about half of the group has voted. Keep them coming in. Okay, I'm going to end in just another few seconds. Okay. So what I see here are that, Paula, it sounds like people kind of agreed with you that the first two could be combined, that tree planting and stormwater management could be one. And I think together they occupy a very high priority in the community.
Thanks, Elaine.
Yeah.
Could take down the poll.
I think I did. Did I?
I can still see it.
I can too.
You just have to exit it out on your own screen.
Did it go away that time? No, it's still there?
I just hit the close button on my own screen and it went away.
Yeah. So we're at that part that we called lightning round, which sounds kind of fun. And it is, I think. It's been fun in the previous two webinars. But what we're going to ask the panelists to do is to help us identify key words or phrases that you think illustrates the ideas that we have been discussing. We're going to see if the whiteboard works this time, but we're going to try to make a list of those things and go through that. We're going to go around as many times as we need to get all of the ideas down from you. And then towards the end, after about 10 minutes, I'd like to open it up to the attendees. So if the attendees, if you could put a word or two or a phrase in the Q&A, we'll add those to the list as we go through this. So looks like we've got it working, or?
Yep.
So I'd like to start with Lisa. What's one word or phrase that captures some of the things that we've been talking about?
resilient.
Resilient. Thank you. We'll wait till I see if that goes up. Great, Zaheen.
Lisa stole my answer.
Sorry.
Participation.
Participation. What do you mean by participation? I think I know, but just to be clear for everyone.
Just making sure that stakeholder voices are incorporated when thinking through all types of infrastructure.
Great, thank you. Better get that down. Michael, you're going to be next. Go ahead.
I'm going to go back to multiple benefits of living infrastructure.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great. Heather.
Ecosystem health is humanity's wealth.
Close anyway. Paul.
I'll go with environmental design.
And what do you mean by that?
Preservation, conservation, asset mapping. Look at what you have before you just go in there and destroy everything.
Great, thank you. I'm going to come back to Lisa.
Shoot, I should have said they stole all my other.
Would you like me to come back?
Flood, low risk.
And what does that mean, low risk?
That you're not prone to flooding, you're not prone to landslides, that you've built in natural safeguards.
Nice.
To avoid those.
Nice. I don't see that being added.
Yeah, I don't see it showing up either.
Yeah, Elaine, did we lose the whiteboard?
I see the whiteboard. Let's see. Is Keely still there?
Keely's muted.
What's
Is
up?
it? I typed it. Is it not coming up?
No.
What if you start a new box?
Can you
Perhaps
see the new
if
box?
you make the box bigger.
So I can always take some notes here. I don't want to lose anything.
Can you see the new box?
Not
at
yet.
all?
No.
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 So I'm going to write that down and then we will add those.
So go ahead, Lisa, would you repeat what you said so that we capture it correctly?
I said low risk.
Low risk, that's right.
Right, from the standpoint of being less susceptible to flooding and landslides.
Thank you. Zaheen.
Along those lines, adaptation.
And you'll have to help us understand what you're thinking about when you say adaptation.
Thinking through current conditions and changing conditions and planning ahead for how we'll need to build our developments and infrastructure to adapt to continually changing climate conditions.
Great, thank you. Michael.
Muted.
Sorry, related to what Zaheen and Lisa just said, thinking about the effects on downstream communities in terms of stormwater, especially.
Oh, there we go.
Oh,
Effects on downstream communities.
We had one of our participants contributed the idea of steps that are environmentally sound.
Yeah, thank you.
And then I'd like to add one that several people had mentioned throughout this discussion was there's a cost to doing things and there's a cost to not doing things. And, Lisa had talked about how to define the monetary value of environmental services. And Zaheen had even quoted some numbers. And I think that, for practical reasons, what I think I've heard everybody here say is that it's really important to understand the cost of things. That was one takeaway that I had from listening to you all today. So I wanted to recapture that.
Thank you. Heather, you have another one.
I think, just again, that future oriented part, planning for the future.
Great, thank you.
And another citizen suggested the idea of internalizing climate change in development, recognize, and that's part of that future planning, I think. So I wanted to mention it now. More and bigger storms, and let's plan for that now.
Thank you. Paul, you were next.
What about like low impact design or green design? Larger buffers, creative storm water management. We talked about some fancy bioswales instead of just piping all your storm water.
Great, thank you. We have about 4 minutes, so we can add a few more if you're willing.
How about partnerships and funding?
Ah, excellent.
Along those lines and in line with Elaine's as well, financial soundness, calculating returns on investment, performing benefit cost analyses on your projects. And those, calculating benefit cost analyses can be very difficult and very technical, but also you could do kind of more qualitative exercises around those as well. Thinking about, if benefit is more parking, cost might be increased instances of flooding, right? And doing almost like a pro-con of different types of developments.
Great idea. Thank you, Zaheen. Anybody else?
One of the participants added creativity.
Nice, nice.
So I would say taking advantage of the opportunity to create a sense of place.
Ah,
The site has its identity as this is the old Westinghouse site. And it doesn't need to be known as the old Westinghouse site. It needs to be known as what it's going to become and the benefit that it's going to provide to the community.
nicely said. Nicely said. What else can we add to this list?
Should we say the future one more time?
Utility you know, thinking about what the usefulness of the space will be, what purpose it is to serve now. Will that need still be there in 10 years, 20 years? We talk about this, sorry for staying on parking so much, but thinking about garages, for example, you know, if you're planning on building a $10 million garage, and people's behaviors and uses of their cars change, will you recoup that investment in the, let's say, 20-year term that you've kind of taken that loan out on? So really thinking about what the utility of spaces are now and what they will be in the future. So I guess Heather said it, the future.
Any more?
It's a good list.
We've exhausted all of the ideas. Well, then I'd like to just take a minute to thank the panelists. You guys have been terrific. I thought you would be, and you were even better. And so I'd like to thank you very, very much for taking your personal time to be involved with this visioning project in Churchill. You've really added so much quality to the project. I'm very, very appreciative of that. I'd like to thank the attendees for sitting through this and helping us with some of the lightning round comments and some of your great questions. I hope you've enjoyed listening to panelists, because I sure have. And so thank you, attendees, for being part of this important process for Churchill. My note here says the session has been recorded, but it's kind of been recorded. Most of it has been recorded. Most of it's been recorded. And we will post that on the website soon, including these whiteboard messages, the list that we've developed. And I hope some of you attendees will join us at 7:15 when we're going to be talking about community well-being and how can that affect this area of opportunities for development in the community as a whole. So we're going to be talking about well-being. And then I don't want you to forget that we have 2 more webinars on the 13th of May at 5:30. We're going to be talking about design standards and forms. And then later that evening on 7:15, we'll be talking about the marketplace. So again, I really appreciate everything that everyone who's been involved with this. And thank you very much for helping us with this webinar. And stay tuned. We'll be back on again at 7:15. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.